It was 1927. Bank robberies were occurring at 3 or 4 per day in Texas. In November, the Texas Bankers Association announced a $5,000 reward for dead bank robbers shot during a robbery. Marshal Ratliff and his brother Lee had spent a year in prison for robbing a bank in Valera. Cisco residents petitioned Governor Myron "Ma" Ferguson to give the brothers another chance. The governor pardoned both of them. A year later, they planned to rob the First National Bank in Cisco. Lee was imprisoned for another robbery before the planned bank robbery. Marshal Ratliff and his ex-convict partners, Henry Helms and Robert Hill, suggested that he invite Helms' cousin, Lewis Davis, to participate. Davis had no prior experience, was desperate for money, and was convinced it would be a simple task. In a stolen Buick, the foursome drove to Cisco. Ratliff disguised himself with a Santa coat and a Santa mask. He did not want to be recognized because his mother owned a diner in Cisco. On December the 23rd, they arrived in Cisco around mid-afternoon. Ratliff hid on the floorboard until they arrived. The rest of the group parked the car in the alley behind the bank. A small group of children followed him to the bank, asking for candy and gifts. The bank was quiet during the lunch hour. There were only 4 employees and a few customers on duty. Ratliff was followed by the 3 assailants who crept in behind him. Santa was the focus of everyone's attention. "Hello, Santa Claus," said banker Joe Spears, who had no idea who was behind the mask. Then he saw the guns. Frances Blassingame, 6, had seen Santa enter the bank from across the street and began pestering her mother to let her see Santa. Mrs. Blassingame took one look at the guns and started shoving her daughter through the bank, ignoring the robbers' orders to stop. She did not stop until she got to the back door, ripping the screen door off the frame and falling into the alley. "They are robbing the bank," exclaimed the two as they dashed to the Cisco police station. "They are holding up the First National." Davis, Hill, and Helms held the bankers and customers at gunpoint, while Santa retrieved a gun from the teller's cage and stuffed it into his waistband. He handed the banker a tow sack and instructed him to fill it. Ratliff yelled, "That is enough," as the banker shoved money, bonds, checks, and paper into the potato sack. As Ratliff emerged from the vault, the robbers opened fire on a man peering through the bank's front window. A hail of gunfire erupted from the street almost immediately. George Emery Bedford, the police chief, and 2 of his officers, along with half the town, converged on the bank. Hardware stores emptied their shelves of firearms, handing them out to customers who were all on their way to the bank. The postmaster and his assistant took their government-issued revolvers and followed him up the alley. Bullets were fired into the bank lobby. The robbers herded everyone into the bank bookkeeping room and started shooting. Customers shot at random through the bank's front windows and even staked out the back alley. One banker attempted to flee through the back door and was shot in the jaw. One of the hostages was hit by a stray bullet as the robbers herded them into the alley. He was shoved into the back seat of the stolen Buick. The Harvard student escaped by sliding across the car and exiting the other side. Customers and employees of the bank fled for their lives. 2 crying little girls were shoved into the car by one of the robbers. When Santa emerged from the bank, the police chief and his deputy were shot in a hail of bullets. Davis exited the bank and ran into the alley, where he was hit by a shotgun blast before collapsing into the Buick. The robbers fled with 2 girls as hostages, just as the postmaster fired, causing one of the rear tires to blow out. At this point, the bandits realized they had not filled the car with gas. A few blocks later, the Harris family noticed Santa waving them to come to a halt. Woodrow Harris, 14, pulled over his Oldsmobile. When the robbers ordered them out of the car, Woodrow politely exited and ran to safety behind a nearby house with his family. The robbers quickly loaded everything into Harris's car, including the girls, the money, and a badly injured Louis Davis. They discovered the 14-year-old driver had taken the keys with him once they were all inside. Under fire from the advancing posse, they returned the hostages to the Buick, leaving Davis in the back seat of the Oldsmobile. They realized they had left the loot with Davis once they were back on the road. Davis and Chief Bedford died later that night. The remaining 3 robbers, 2 of whom were bleeding from bullet wounds, abandoned the 2 girls and went into hiding in the Eastland County brush. The men returned to town and stole a Ford, which they used to elude police for days. It started to rain and sleet. The men had not yet been apprehended, but they were unable to flee Eastland County. They wrecked the Ford, but carjacked a Dodge and its driver, Carl Wiley, 22. In his haste to shoot the fleeing bandits, Wiley's father accidentally shot his son in the arm. After stealing another vehicle, the men let Wiley go. The robbery made national headlines. The Texas Rangers joined the hunt. A biplane was used to search for the men from the air, marking the first time an airplane was used to assist in the capture of bank robbers. Back in Cisco, Deputy Carmichael had also died from the shots fired in the alley, bringing the total to 3 dead and 8 wounded, not counting the robbers on the run. Police set up a roadblock in South Bend based on the information Carl Wiley had provided. The bandits were ambushed as they attempted to cross the Brazos River. Cy Bradford, a Texas Ranger, shot all 3 suspects as they fled. Ratliff was apprehended, but Helms and Hill eluded authorities for a few more days. They were captured close to Graham. They were critically wounded by the gunshots and severely weakened as a result of blood loss. Dehydration and exhaustion were plaguing the men. The trials began the next month. Ratliff and Hill were both sentenced to 99 years in prison for the robbery. Both men were sentenced to death for the murders of Chief Bedford and Deputy Carmichael. The men filed their appeals. They claimed they were insane. Helms' appeal was initially denied, and on September the 6th, 1929, he was dragged from his cell and electrocuted in a chair known as Old Sparky. Ratliff, who was still awaiting execution, continued to act insane, going limp and needing to be fed, bathed, and dressed like an invalid, while babbling incoherently. He was returned to the Eastland jail for the insanity hearing. Ratliff used an unlocked cell door to slip downstairs and get the jailer's unattended gun after 25 days of lying motionless and pretending insanity. He shot and killed Uncle Tom Jones before being pistol whipped by the other jailer, Pack Kilborn, with a stolen revolver. Hundreds of Eastland residents gathered in front of the jail on the evening of November the 19th, 1929, to lynch Ratliff. Pack Kilborn, the jail's warden, was restrained, and Ratliff was dragged into the street. The enraged residents wrapped a rope around his neck and lifted his naked body into the air. After the first rope broke, the residents obtained a second rope and successfully hanged the Santa Claus bank robber in front of hundreds of people. The body was left in front of the hardware store until the coroner arrived. Bobby Hill, the youngest of the robbers, eventually served the mandatory 20 years of his 99-year sentence after multiple prison escapes. In 1948, he was released from prison, assumed a new identity, and went on to become a productive member of society in a small West Texas town. The Texas Bankers Association never paid out the reward money because they could not work out who shot Louis Davis. Although a historical marker marks the location of the former First National Bank, few people outside of Cisco recall the Santa Claus robbery of 1927.